So, you probably heard the Federal Reserve just made a big move. But what if I told you that move isn't even the real story? We're talking about something much bigger, a potential power shift that could completely change the game for the US economy. Let's dig into what's really going on here.
Okay, so on the surface, the headline news is pretty straightforward, right? The Federal Reserve, the country's central bank, went ahead and cut its key interest rate. It's the decision everyone had their eyes on. But here's the thing. Just like with anything coming out of Washington or Wall Street, the headline rarely tells the whole story. And trust me, there's a way more interesting plot unfolding just under the surface. And that plot? It's all about who might be taking charge next at, well, the most powerful financial institution on the entire planet. See, this one little rate cut, it's really just a sneak peek of a much, much bigger fight that's on the horizon. All right, Section 1, the Fed's divided decision. To really get what's at stake here, we've got to rewind a bit and look at the decision itself. Because let me tell you, it was anything but a united front. So here's the official announcement from the current Fed chair, Jerome Powell. You can hear it, right? Super calm, very by the book, just a standard policy change. So the cut was 25 basis points. That's 0.25%. And look, that's a pretty standard move in the world of central banking. But the way they got to that decision, that was anything but standard. So you have to ask, right? Was everyone actually on board with this? The short answer, not even close. Okay, so the committee that makes these calls, the FOMC, was all over the place. I mean, you had the majority of the Fed's regional presidents saying, nope, let's hold rates steady. Then you had this other small group saying, go bigger, cut by 50 basis points. In the middle of all that, you have Powell, who had to use all his clout as the chair to just barely push this 25-point cut through. We're talking about a super fragile agreement here. This whole thing really shows you the kind of influence Powell has right now. But it's also a huge clue that this influence might not be around for long. His term is coming to an end, and if a new chair steps in, well, the entire playbook could get thrown out. All right, Section 2, leading without all the data. And just to make things even more complicated, Powell had to make this really tough divided call while basically flying blind. So get this, a recent government shutdown meant there was this massive data blackout. The Fed was missing its go-to reports, the big ones, official payroll numbers, key inflation stats like the CPI and PPI, all gone. So what do? You have to scramble and rely on other stuff, like private payroll data and your own internal reports. And this quote from Anna Wong at Bloomberg Economics just nails it. The problem wasn't that the data was just running late. For a whole bunch of these key indicators, the October numbers are just gone forever. It's like a black hole in our economic data. So with his usual dashboard of economic stats totally dark, Powell had to lean on something called the Beige Book. Now, this is basically a collection of stories and on-the-ground reports from all over the country. And his read of it was that the job market was starting to look a little shaky, since about half the districts were reporting that employment was either flat or even going down. It was a huge judgment call, based more on stories than on hard numbers. All right, let's get to Section 3. Enter Kevin Hassett. So you've got this messy, divided decision made with half the data missing, and all of this perfectly sets the stage for the guy who might be next in line. And then you get this really cryptic comment from former President Trump. That was pretty much all it took. Suddenly, everyone knew that Kevin Hassett, one of his top economic guys, was the frontrunner to take over for Powell.
Now, if you look at his resume, Hassett has the perfect background for a Fed chair. I mean, he was the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. That's the same job that past Fed giants like Janet Yellen and Alan Greenspan had. So yeah, he's been deep in the world of economic policy for a long time.
But here's where it gets interesting. Hassett is kind of a two-sided coin. What we usually see is the public-facing version, the guy on TV defending the administration's policies. But behind closed doors, people who've actually worked with him paint a totally different picture. They say he's a super sharp, data-driven analyst who really gets the whole economic picture. And what's really interesting is that his public style seems to be changing lately. He's sounding, well, more like a Fed chairman, more cautious, more focused on the data. It almost feels like he's auditioning for the part, picking his words super carefully, staying away from any big, bold predictions. Okay. Section 4, the Fed's future at stake. So all this brings us to the million-dollar question. What would a Fed actually look like with Kevin Hassett in charge? And believe me, the stakes for the economy, and yeah, for your wallet, could not be higher.
Now, Hassett supporters are quick to make a really important distinction. They'll tell you this isn't about blowing up the Fed's independence. It's about something they call Fed accountability. The whole idea is that the Fed shouldn't just exist in its own bubble. It has to be held responsible for the outcomes of its policies, especially when it comes to keeping inflation in check. And this right here shows you a massive clash in how they see the world. Take the economic impact of tax cuts, for example. Hassett's estimate of how much they'll boost growth is something like 4 times more optimistic than what the Fed's own staff economists predict. I mean, this isn't just a tiny disagreement, it's a Grand Canyon-sized gap in their economic philosophies. So you might be wondering, where does all that optimism come from? Well, Hassett is betting on what you could call an X factor, a huge boom in productivity. His theory is that this boom could let the economy grow way faster than we think is possible, all without triggering the runaway inflation you'd normally expect. It's a big bet, basically, on innovation and American efficiency. And this bet leads us down 2 totally different paths for the future. You have the bull case. Hassett is right, the productivity boom happens, and we get this amazing, strong economy with low inflation. Then there's the bear case. He's wrong. That productivity boom never shows up, his policies lead to soaring inflation, and the Fed is forced to slam on the brakes with painful rate hikes, maybe even triggering a recession right before a presidential election.
So at the end of the day, that's the massive question hanging over everything. Are we looking at an economic boom fueled by a once-in-a-generation productivity surge? Or are we headed for a bust right before an election? Choosing the next Fed chair isn't just about picking a person. It's a huge, high-stakes gamble on one of 2 very different futures for the U.S. economy. And it all comes down to whether that mysterious X factor is the real deal or just wishful thinking.